man hangs in chains above a wood. Rain cuts across him in sheets. Below him, men crouch beside a ladder with their faces covered. The body looks like it has already been abandoned by the world. But this was not a nightmare, it was a drawing. Someone built this horror slowly, line by line, and meant every inch of it. His name was Sidney Sime, and one of the most powerful men in publishing called him the greatest imaginative artist alive. Before anyone called him an imaginative artist, Sidney Sime was a boy underground. He had been born in Manchester in 1865 into a poverty that did not leave room for softness. As soon as he was old enough, he was sent underground. For about 5 years, he worked in the Yorkshire pits, pushing scoops of coal along rails through tunnels too low to stand in, some of them only 28 inches high. Men were injured doing that work. Sime nearly died there more than once. The mine did not care who he was, it only cared whether he came back up and was working the next day. Down there in the dark, he started scratching imps and devils into the pit walls, little creatures made in stolen moments before the work took him back. Nobody taught him to draw like that, and nobody needed to. He was already living inside the thing he would spend the rest of his life putting on paper. He got out, not because the world opened a door for him, but because he kept finding the next narrow way through. He worked for a linen draper, then a baker, then as a signwriter, whatever paid enough to move him one step further from the pit. Signwriting got him noticed, and eventually it took him to the Liverpool School of Art. He was good enough to win prizes there, and good enough that people who would never have looked twice at a miner's son began to pay attention. This matters because the horror in Sime's later work was not an act. The hanged bodies, the skull-faced gods, and the beasts waiting in the trees came from a darkness he had already worked inside. He had pushed coal through it, and he had scratched devils onto its walls. Everything he drew afterwards was not an escape from the mine. It was the mine, coming back with him. London did not know what to do with Sidney Sime at first. He began drawing for magazines, for Pick Me Up, The Idler, and the Pall Mall Gazette. It was quick, sharp work made for pages that had to catch the eye before the reader turned them over. Sime could be funny, and he could be savage, and sometimes he was both in the same drawing. His satire came wearing a monster's face, but the monsters were what people remembered. In 1904, an Irish writer named Edward Plunkett approached him, a man the world would come to know better as Lord Dunsany. Dunsany was writing a book of invented gods. A year later, Sime illustrated The Gods of Pagania, and something in both men found its proper shape. Dunsany wrote gods, and Sime gave them bodies. They were not comforting bodies, and they were nothing like the clean, heroic gods of schoolbooks and museums. These were beings from somewhere older and less human, figures wrapped in darkness, and they looked less like rulers of the world than the things waiting behind it. The partnership lasted for decades, and it carried Sime's name further than the magazine pages ever had. In 1905 and 1906, he spent 6 months in America working for William Randolph Hearst. Hearst had money, newspapers, and access to nearly any illustrator he wanted, and he called Sidney Sime the greatest living imaginative artist. That was not a small thing to say about a man who had once pushed coal through tunnels too low to stand in. By then, Sime had already money of his own. In 1898, an uncle in Scotland died, and left him £14,000 and a small estate. Syme did what a lot of people do with sudden freedom and no one sensible standing close enough. He bought The Idler, the magazine that had once published him, and the whole experiment was over by 1901. A few years later, he bought the old Crown Inn at Worplesdon in Surrey and turned it into a cottage. The cottage at Worplesdon did not keep the world out for long. In 1918, Sidney Syme was called up. He developed a duodenal ulcer and was invalided out on Armistice Day. What else came back with him is harder to name. After the war, the work turned inward. He became obsessed with the Book of Revelation. He began painting his own visions of the apocalypse, the beasts and the judgment, and the skies opening, the end of everything, made slowly in a cottage in Surrey with no one asking him to. They feel like places no one was meant to enter. In 1924, Syme had a solo exhibition at St George's Gallery in London, and it was well received. In 1927, he had another, this time with less acclaim. After that, the door closed. He called the exhibitions the last infirmity of senile kind. Sidney Syme died on the 22nd of May 1941. The death of a reclusive artist in Surrey was not the kind of news the world stopped to mourn. His wife, Mary Syme, was left with the house and the work inside it. She could have let them scatter, but she did not. After her death, she left his artworks and possessions to Worplesdon Memorial Hall. The Howard de Walden collection, once one of the finest holdings of his work, is now unavailable, and much of it is believed to have been lost in a fire. The Dunsany originals remain at Dunsany Castle in County Meath, not lost, but not public either, viewable by arrangement. And yet, he did not disappear completely. H.P. Lovecraft knew the work. In Pickman's model, Lovecraft names Syme as one of the artists who could catch something beyond life, and in The Call of Cthulhu, he reaches for Syme again when ordinary horror is not enough. Decades later, Roger Dean would cite Syme as an influence too. The line did not die, it just went underground. He crawled out of a coal mine to become one of the most praised imaginative artists of his generation. Then he spent the rest of his life making sure nobody could have him. In the end, he got something close to what he asked for. His images survived, his name almost did not. But there's another kind of disappearance. Sidney Syme hid himself from the world. Harry Clarke gave his country the finest work of his life, and his own government hid it for him. The story is on screen if you click now. Thanks for watching.